the beginning of the show, we meet Jonathan Smith walking alone down a quiet road, heading somewhere unknown. He waves to a passing truck and asks the older man driving for a ride. The man rudely says no because according to him, nothing is free in this cruel world. Jonathan tells him that kindness is free, but the man isn't interested and drives away. Moments later, the truck suddenly breaks down. Jonathan offers to help, but the man stubbornly refuses at first, not wanting him to touch it. However, after struggling to fix it himself and getting nowhere, he reluctantly allows Jonathan to take a look at the engine. Like a miracle, Jonathan fixes the truck and kindly wishes him a good day, which makes the man change his mind and offer a ride. Jonathan reveals he is on his way to Havencrest, a retirement home for old people. After the man drops him at Havencrest, Jonathan steps inside to find old people drowsing and going about their boring days in the lounge area. Jonathan heads to the manager, Mr. Huskins' office, for a job interview. However, Mr. Huskins points out that the job posting wasn't supposed to appear in the newspaper until the next day. Jonathan explains that he has a friend at the newspaper and thought getting in early might give him an edge. While Mr. Huskins believes the story, he refuses to hire anyone without references. In response, Jonathan makes a deal. He'll work as a handyman for a month for free, and if Mr. Huskins is happy with his work, they can talk about hiring him after that. The manager agrees, and one of the staff members, Leslie, takes Jonathan to the utility room. The lock doesn't seem to work, but Jonathan grabs the key and unlocks it like it's no big deal, almost as if he has some kind of magic touch. Later, Leslie suggests an apartment for him, knowing he's new in town. In the next scene, Jonathan gets to work, starting with fixing a swamp cooler for one of the residents, Estelle. Unlike most of the others, Estelle isn't a regular in the common areas. She prefers to stay in her room, avoiding the social drama and the endless soap operas. Another resident, Sydney, has a big crush on her and is often caught spying on her through the door. While Jonathan works, Estelle mentions that her daughter will be returning soon from Europe and will be moving in with her. Later, Jonathan works in the garden, planting beautiful flowers and carefully tending to the soil. Leslie is impressed by his skills and asks him where he got the flowers. Jonathan casually reveals a friend of his donated to him. However, Mr. Huskins is not happy with the work because there is no money in their budget for flowers. Jonathan tells him that all the flowers are free, a generous donation from his friend. That evening, Leslie invites Jonathan to her apartment, where he meets her brother, Mark, a former cop. Lately, Mark has been getting into a lot of problems, especially due to his excessive drinking habit. When the TV doesn't work, Mark lashes out at Leslie, causing Jonathan to step away and give them some private time. The hot-headed Mark storms off to a bar, almost itching for a fight, a reckless pattern he's been falling into more and more lately. Leslie shares this with Jonathan, and also reveals that Mark was actually fired from his job for fighting. He was suspended for excessive use of force. Jonathan then offers to stop by the bar and check on Mark. At the bar, he spots Mark sitting alone, clearly wasted. When Jonathan approaches, Mark angrily tells him to back off and even grabs him by the collar. Strangely, Mark can't seem to muster any real force against him. Realizing he's crossed the line, Mark lets go and apologizes. As the tension eases, he begins talking about his sister, Leslie, mentioning how she's never dated anyone. Their conversation is interrupted when Mark's attention shifts to a stunning girl nearby. Fueled by alcohol, he starts bothering her. The girl's boyfriend notices and steps in to confront Mark. Jonathan quickly intervenes, apologizing on Mark's behalf, but the boyfriend isn't willing to let it slide. He challenges Mark to step outside behind the bar. Once there, the man punches Mark and throws him to the ground. Another guy joins in, taking swings at Mark too. Just when things look dire, Jonathan arrives and effortlessly handles the two aggressors, teaching them a lesson they won't forget. With the situation under control, he helps Mark up and takes him home. The next day, Leslie notices two bicycles parked in front of her building. Jonathan suddenly appears and tells her that they're for them to ride to work. When she asks where he got them, Jonathan casually says a friend gave them to him. They hop on and ride together to Havencrest while enjoying the fresh air. When they arrive, Leslie is amazed to see that the flowers have already bloomed. Just yesterday, they were planted, and now they're in full bloom, vibrant and alive. Later, while watering the plants, Jonathan invites Sydney and the other residents to join him in gardening. They happily agree, grabbing tools and heading outside. It's the first time in a long while they've done something so fun. However, Mr. Huskins isn't pleased with the work. He storms over, complaining that they're dealing with elderly people here and it's too risky to give them tools, let alone let them garden. Jonathan calmly reassures him that no one will get hurt, and that the residents are actually enjoying themselves. Leslie then stands up to Mr. Huskins, backing Jonathan's efforts. Left with little choice, Mr. Huskins reluctantly accepts but warns that if anything goes wrong, they'll be held responsible. To make things more fun, Jonathan organizes a picnic in the backyard and serves the residents hamburgers and steaks. Meanwhile, Sydney visits Estelle's room and brings her a bouquet of flowers. However, Estelle continues ignoring him and asking him to leave her alone. Sydney attempts to get her outside and enjoy the picnic, but Estelle is in no mood to talk to him. Having no choice, Sydney confesses his love for her and quietly leaves the room. While everyone is thrilled with Jonathan's efforts to brighten the lives of the residents, Mark remains suspicious. He can't help but wonder how Jonathan managed to afford the blooming flowers, 2 expensive bicycles, and even a barbecue stand. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark decides to investigate the matter on his own. The next morning, Jonathan visits Estelle, hoping to gently nudge her out of her comfort zone. To her delight, he brings a puppy, knowing how much she adores animals. He asks her to take care of the puppy for a few days, and she eagerly agrees. Meanwhile, Mark heads to a local bicycle store to dig deeper into Jonathan's story. He asks the owner if anyone has donated bicycles to someone named Jonathan. The owner denies ever giving away bicycles for free, explaining that he only offers discounts on purchases. He even tries to sell a new bike to Mark. However, Mark declines as he is more focused on his investigation. With no proof to back up Jonathan's story, he grows even more suspicious. The next day, Estelle surprises everyone, especially Sydney, by finally stepping out of her room to walk the puppy. Seizing the moment, Sydney asks her out to dinner, and she happily agrees. That evening, Leslie invites Jonathan to dinner. As she gets ready, Mark warns her about Jonathan, claiming he might be a con artist. Leslie instead tells him to give her some privacy, and reveals that she is confident in her own judgment. Frustrated, Mark steps out and drives to the next street. Once Jonathan leaves his apartment, Mark sneaks inside to investigate. To his shock, the apartment is completely empty, no clothes, no food in the fridge, not even a toothbrush or razor. Meanwhile, Leslie and Jonathan prepare for dinner, but Leslie realizes she forgot to buy sour cream. Jonathan reassures her, saying he might have some in his apartment, and heads back to get it. Moments later, he grabs a sour cream container from the same fridge Mark had just found empty. He suddenly senses someone's presence and calls out for Mark to come out of hiding. Mark then confronts Jonathan, demanding to know who he really is. The latter calmly replies that he's just doing his job, that is, helping people as instructed by his boss. When Mark asks who his boss is, Jonathan casually says, God. Mark is convinced Jonathan is bluffing and threatens to call the police. However, Jonathan locks the front door and urges him to listen. He then reveals that he's an angel, not a perfect one, but he does his best. He was sent by God to help those in need. Still skeptical, Mark tries to leave, but the door won't budge. To prove his claim, Jonathan asks Mark to check the fridge again. Though doubtful, Mark opens it and is stunned to find a plate of steak, his favorite meal inside. For the first time, Mark starts to wonder if Jonathan might actually be telling the truth. When Jonathan returns with the sour cream, he finds Leslie talking on the phone with Estelle. Turns out, Mr. Huskins is selling Havencrest, and the residents have nowhere to go. Worried, Leslie, Jonathan, and Mark drive to the retirement home and discuss their plan to stop Mr. Huskins from selling the home. Estelle finally breaks down and confesses the painful truth to everyone. Her story about her daughter picking her up after returning from Europe was a lie. In reality, her daughter abandoned her at Havencrest, deeming Estelle too much of a burden to care for. What's worse is the fact that her daughter doesn't work and has plenty of free time, yet she still chose to leave Estelle at the retirement home. This cruel rejection weighs on Estelle every day, making her feel broken and unwanted. It's why she avoided talking to people or getting close to anyone. But then Jonathan showed up, and for the first time in ages, she started to feel like life might have some meaning again. That tiny bit of hope kept her going until today, when the devastating news about their home being sold shattered her all over again. The news hit everyone hard. Havencrest isn't just a place to stay, it's their whole world. Now, with the future so uncertain, the residents are scared and desperate. They come together and pray that somehow, some way, a miracle will save their home. The next morning, Jonathan confronts Mr. Huskins and attempts to talk him out of selling Havencrest. Unfortunately, the manager has made up his mind and instead gives him 2 options, either to buy the home for $116,000 or stop bothering him. Jonathan has less than a day to find the money to match the offer. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Mark suggests Jonathan bet on a horse race. Left with no other choice, Jonathan reluctantly agrees to the risky plan. On the day of the race, Jonathan and Mark send Sydney to place a bet on the number 5 horse, Devil's Lad, which Jonathan had chosen with a little inspiration. Leslie, Estelle, and the rest of the residents also join them in the race and wait for the much-awaited performance. Although the race is close, the number 7 horse, Cindy Kim, wins, leaving everyone thinking their chance is gone. However, as they leave the track, They check the ticket and discover a mistake. Turns out, the clerk accidentally gave Sydney a ticket for the number 7 horse instead. Jonathan and the group calculate their winnings and realize they now have more than enough to buy Havencrest for themselves. Together, they return to the retirement home as the new owners and tell Mr. Huskins how things will be from now on, including allowing outings, pets, and barbecues. That night, the residents throw a lively party to celebrate their win. Sydney and Estelle kiss for the first time while others equally enjoy their time together. Meanwhile, Jonathan prepares to move on, now that his first mission is complete. Mark asks him to stay for a few days, but Jonathan tells him that his work is done here. Before leaving, he offers Mark some advice, telling him to take care of Leslie because she deserves a better life. The following morning, as Jonathan walks down the road looking for a ride, Mark pulls up and asks him to get inside. He tells Jonathan that he wants to help him help others. Jonathan initially refuses, explaining that God doesn't allow partners. But as Mark drives off, his car suddenly backfires and breaks down. Jonathan then takes this as a sign that God changed his mind. He fixes Mark's car and joins him for their next adventure. After hours on the road, the duo picks up a young hitchhiker named Tony, heading to the next town. Wanting to be kind, they stop at a roadside diner and offer to buy him some food. But Tony refuses and stays in the car. Mark figures Tony is too proud to accept their help, so he orders a burger and fries for him. He plans to pretend it's his own food that he couldn't finish and offer it to the kid. But before the food arrives, Tony jumps into the driver's seat and steals Mark's car. Mark quickly realizes what's happened and chases after him, but it's clearly no use. Meanwhile, Jonathan heads off to his next assignment, leaving Mark to deal with the situation. It is revealed that the assignment is a young boy named Arthur, who has terminal cancer. Arthur lost his dad, an astronaut in a plane crash. Just like his father, he has always wanted to go to the moon. The young boy, who is the same age as Tony, wishes to God for the chance to live long enough to reach out and touch the moon. At a clinic, Evelyn, Arthur's mom, meets with the doctor and receives the heartbreaking news that her son doesn't have much time left. Overwhelmed with grief, she breaks down in tears, questioning and blaming God for placing her in such an unbearable situation. Meanwhile, Mark eventually finds his car and tracks down Tony in his grandma's apartment. However, he decides not to turn the kid in, even after his grandma insists. Instead, Mark brings Tony to find Jonathan, who is posing as a friend of Arthur's late astronaut father. The scene cuts to Evelyn's house. Jonathan pretends to be her husband's colleague and brings over a submarine toy for Arthur. Evelyn is touched by the gesture, so she invites him in to meet with Arthur. This kid, having a passion for space, talks about his love for the moon and shares everything he's gathered from the telescope gifted by his late father. Arthur is overjoyed to have met Jonathan, who once knew his father. He then invites him to stay over for dinner. Just then, Mark and Tony show up at the door and Evelyn asks everyone to stay for a barbecue. They enjoy a meal together, chatting and having a good time over dinner. After dinner, Arthur invites Mark and Tony to look through his telescope, but Tony slips away. He heads downstairs to steal small items from the house. While trying to leave, he runs into Jonathan, who immediately knows what Tony is up to. Initially, Tony doesn't regret stealing because he believes Arthur has everything he's ever wanted: a mansion, a loving mother, and a yard full of space junk. However, when Jonathan tells him about Arthur's cancer struggles and reveals that the boy is dying, this news shifts Tony's perspective. He then begins to bond with Arthur, spending time with him and helping make his days joyful. One night, Arthur opens up to Tony and admits he's dying. Tony, already aware, looks deeply upset but doesn't say much at first. Arthur confesses he's scared, unsure of what's waiting for him on the other side. Then, with a shaky voice, he asks his friend for a favor, something that clearly means the world to him. He asks Tony to look after his mom when he's gone. Arthur says softly that Tony and his mom are like two pieces of a puzzle that just fit as if it's fate. He doesn't want to leave this world knowing his mom will be alone, and he doesn't want Tony to face life without someone by his side either. Arthur's voice breaks as he pleads with Tony to think about it. After a moment, Tony nods and promises that he will. The group, including Mark, Tony, and Jonathan, stays with Arthur for several days, allowing him to enjoy various fun activities. However, one night, Arthur collapses and is taken back to the hospital. When he regains consciousness, he asks his mom to adopt Tony as her child, adding that he always wanted a brother. Filled with emotion, Evelyn agrees and promises to take care of Tony. Meanwhile, Tony is also now deeply connected to Arthur and his mother, so he decides to stay and support her through the grief of losing her son. Later that night, Jonathan visits Arthur to take him on his final journey. Arthur is eager to see him and asks if it's possible for him to go to the moon. Given his condition, Jonathan gently asks him to look out the window at the full moon, and keep his eyes on it. As Arthur gazes at the glowing moon, a smile spreads across his face. He excitedly says he feels like he's getting closer to it. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave 1,000 likes or 100 comments if you'd like us to continue part 2. Thank you.